Is the euro the real cause of the crises we will explore today, or is the blame elsewhere? In our first video, we looked at the history of 5 European nations on the brink of bankruptcy, each with its own currency. Now, we enter the common house of the European Union at the very moment it was catching fire. We will tell you the story of 5 countries that adopted the euro and shared the same terrible diagnosis. And stay with us until the end, because we will answer some fundamental questions. Is the euro the real cause? What are the common factors that triggered these crises? And has Europe really learned its lesson? Welcome to Amazing Europe. Number 1. Greece. The Greek crisis was one of the most divisive of modern history. Some blamed the euro, others the troika, others the Greeks themselves. But the situation was more complex than it might seem. To enter the single currency club in 2001, Greece, whose accounts were a disaster, made a fatal choice. It falsified its books. It was a secret swept under the rug. Once inside, an almost unbelievable phenomenon occurred. Greece, which had previously paid extremely high interest rates, could now borrow money at the same rock-bottom rates as rock-solid Germany. It was like giving a credit card with no limit to a partygoer. And the party lasted for nearly a decade, fueled by a growing debt spent on lavish Olympics and a clientelist public sector, all seasoned with massive tax evasion. When the iceberg of the global crisis hit in 2008, the party was over. The following year, the new Greek government confessed the truth to the world. "We lied to you, our accounts are a disaster." Panic ensued. No one wanted to lend a single cent to Greece, pushing it to the brink of bankruptcy and threatening to drag down the entire Eurozone. This is when the Troika entered the scene, a trio of international lenders: the International Monetary Fund, the European Commission, and the European Central Bank. Their multi-billion euro bailout came with a brutal price, the harshest austerity cure ever seen in the West, with devastating cuts to wages, pensions, and public services. German public opinion was furious at the idea of saving lazy Greeks with their own money. But these funds, contrary to what many believed, did not go into the pockets of Greek citizens. Independent studies reveal that more than 90% of the money was not used for Greek pensions, but to repay the original creditors, the big banks, especially German and French, which for years had happily lent to Greece. It was a bailout of European banks disguised as a national rescue, meant to prevent the domino effect that could have destroyed the continental financial system. In Greece, anti-euro sentiment grew. Trapped in the single currency, the country could not use the safety valve of devaluation to boost exports, as Italy had done in 1992, something we saw in the other video. Austerity became the only devastating medicine, creating a deadly spiral of recession and unemployment that left deep scars. In 2015, the exhausted people elected Alexis Tsipras, who in a referendum shouted a proud no to new measures. But it was an illusion. Threatened with expulsion from the euro and with banks shut down, Greece was forced into unconditional surrender, accepting even harsher austerity. Today, Greece has reformed its state, but at an immense human cost. The crisis left behind 2 major lessons, which do not point the finger at the euro itself, but at its incomplete architecture. First, creating a single currency without a fiscal union, that is, without a common budget to help countries in difficulty, generates a rigid system. In times of crisis, the adjustment falls entirely on the weaker nations. Without the possibility of devaluing the currency, the only path left is the extremely painful one of internal austerity. Second, the crisis reveals a universal truth for every country. No monetary architecture, however perfect, can save a nation that is unable to build an efficient state, fight tax evasion, and manage its finances responsibly. Number 2. Ireland. If Greece was the black sheep of the Eurozone, Ireland was the model student. It was the celebrated Celtic tiger with record growth, orderly public finances, and a tax haven that attracted multinationals. It seemed to prove that the euro automatically generated prosperity. But pride came before a devastating fall that overturned every stereotype about the European crisis. Joining the euro unleashed a tsunami of cheap money. Banks, flooded with liquidity, found their golden goose, a colossal housing bubble. Ireland became addicted to a collective drug, real estate. Institutions like Anglo-Irish Bank granted loans without guarantees, even up to 110% of property value. A Dublin apartment cost more than a villa in Beverly Hills. Ireland's original sin was not public debt, but private debt spiralling out of control. Banks had become casinos, betting everything on the eternal illusion of rising property values. In 2008, the Lehman Brothers iceberg shattered global finance. For the Celtic Tiger, it was a heart attack. The bubble burst, prices collapsed, developers went bankrupt. Banks were left with unrecoverable toxic debts. They were technically dead, dragging the model economy into an unforeseen tragedy. Here, the Irish government made what is considered one of the worst decisions in modern financial history. Unlike Iceland, which, as we saw in the other video, let its banks fail to save its people, Ireland did the exact opposite. On the night of September 29, 2008, terrified by the risk of total collapse, the government committed a fatal act. It guaranteed all the debts of its banks, not only Irish savings, but also the billions owed to major international creditors. With this move, the cancer of private debt was transferred wholesale onto the healthy body of the state. A private debt became a public cancer. The Irish state, once virtuous, found itself crushed by a burden so immense it pushed the country to bankruptcy. In November 2010, the once proud Celtic Tiger, humiliated, was forced to request a bailout from the Troika. Ireland too endured a harsh austerity cure, but with an even more bitter taste. The Irish felt betrayed. They were paying with cuts to their wages not to save their country, but to rescue foreign creditors and irresponsible bankers. The most painful consequence was the return of a historical ghost, mass emigration of thousands of young people. Today, Ireland has recovered spectacularly, but the method raises doubts. Has it truly learned the lesson, or has it merely swapped one vulnerability for another? To restart, it doubled down on its old strategy: ultra-low taxes to attract global tech and pharmaceutical giants. The paradox is clear. It cured the disease of 2008, the risk of internal bank implosion, but exposed itself to a completely new vulnerability: external shock. Today, Ireland's GDP is artificially inflated by the profits of multinationals like Apple and Google. Prosperity hangs by a thread, one it does not control, tugged by decisions taken in Washington or Brussels on global taxation. The tiger is running again, but its foundations today may be as powerful as they are fragile. Number 3. Portugal. Not every crisis begins with an explosion. Some arrive quietly, like a tide that rises slowly until it submerges everything. Portugal's crisis did not involve Greece's falsified accounts or Ireland's zombie banks. It had something far more common and, for that reason, much more frightening: a chronic weakness that turned the country into the Eurozone's silent domino. For Portugal, joining the euro seemed like the cure for all its ills. Suddenly, money became cheap. But unlike others, Portugal did not use this easy money to fuel a bubble. It simply used it to live beyond its means. For a decade, the nation accumulated a silent debt, both public and private, without investing to modernize its economy. Its underlying problem was a lack of competitiveness. Year after year, it lost ground compared to the giants of Northern Europe, like a swimmer in a long-distance race who realizes too late that he has run out of strength. When the Greek fire erupted in 2010, global investors, terrified, asked, "Who will be next?" Their eyes fell on Portugal. There was no scandal, only a weak economy and high debt. And that was enough. The wave of distrust was unstoppable. In April 2011, the swimmer was exhausted and forced to request a bailout from the Troika to avoid an imminent bankruptcy. The country received its dose of bitter medicine, a €78 billion loan in exchange for the usual harsh austerity program. Youth unemployment skyrocketed and, like a ghost from the past, mass emigration returned. But Portugal reacted with dignified resignation, implementing the required reforms and becoming the model student of the bailout program. Yet what happened afterward revealed the complex Portuguese lesson. Emerging from the harshest austerity, the country bet everything on a new economic model, a massive opening to tourism and foreign real estate investment. Its cities were transformed into vibrant international hubs, but this choice came at a very high price. Historic centres were emptied of their residents, pushed out by a housing bubble that made rents unsustainable. And while the tourism-driven economy thrived, the public healthcare system fell into a deep crisis, plagued by chronic underfunding and massive cuts to medical staff. So, what did Portugal learn? It understood that it could no longer survive by relying on foreign debt, but the lesson it drew was not to build a more autonomous economy. Instead, it traded one dependency for another. From financial dependence on foreign banks, it moved to an even deeper dependence on foreign consumption and capital in volatile sectors. It stopped being Europe's sick man, but it did so by becoming the continent's luxury resort, with all the fragilities that this entails. Number 4. Spain. If Greece was a sinking boat, Spain was an aircraft carrier about to capsize. This was where the euro crisis, which began on the periphery, threatened to overwhelm the very heart of the system. The story of the Spanish miracle turned nightmare is the story of a giant that, stumbling, made the entire world tremble. For years, Spain's government debt had been incredibly low. Its original sin, as in Ireland, was a housing bubble of biblical proportions, fueled by a river of cheap money guaranteed by the euro. For a decade, Spain built more houses than France, Germany, and the United Kingdom combined. But financing this madness were not only the big banks. Hundreds of regional savings banks were also involved. Controlled not by bankers but by local politicians, these became the cash cows of a corrupt system, financing grandiose projects with no economic logic. When the global crisis erupted in 2008, the party ended. The bubble burst, and the regional savings banks found themselves with balance sheets full of unsellable bricks. Technically, they were all bankrupt. The Spanish state, initially healthy, was infected by the cancer as it tried to save them, and it began to stagger. By 2012, panic had arrived. Spain was too big to fail, but also too big to bail. European bailout funds simply were not enough. If Spain fell, the euro would collapse. Europe held its breath. Interest rates on Spanish debt soared. Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy was cornered. If Spain fell, the euro would end. The solution found was unique. It was not a full national bailout like Greece's, but a targeted rescue of the banks alone. Europe granted a credit line of up to 100 billion euros with a single purpose: to plug the black holes of the failed regional savings banks. The money, therefore, did not enter the state budget to pay salaries or pensions, but went directly into healing the sick financial system. Yet, this did not spare Spanish citizens from a harsh cure. To avoid the humiliation of a full bailout and under the close supervision of the Troika, the government imposed austerity on its own initiative. The cuts were brutal, slashing healthcare and education. It was a way to save the giant without admitting it, but the price was borne entirely by the population. Unemployment soared to a terrifying 26%, and social anger gave new strength to the Indignados movement, which occupied squares across the nation. The crisis did not only destroy the economy, it fractured Spain's society and politics. Austerity, combined with rage against what was called the corrupt caste, shattered the traditional two-party system. From the ashes of that protest, two new parties were born: Podemos on the radical left and Ciudadanos in the liberal centre, which permanently ended the dominance of the Socialists and the Popular Party. Later, others would emerge as well. Spain was forced into a brutal but necessary clean-up of its financial system. But the deeper lesson is another one. The country discovered that even when a giant is saved from the abyss, the scars of that fall remain visible for decades, not only in the accounts, but also in the soul of a nation. Today's political instability is a direct child of that trauma, and the European Union also learned a lesson: to change forever the way it intervenes in crises. That is precisely what happened in the European country we are about to see next. But before discovering the final country and understanding the red thread that has tied all these crises together, if you found this video informative, we ask you to support our project with a like, by subscribing to the channel and by clicking the bell so you won't miss our new videos. And don't forget to check out our new channel, America vs. Europe, where we compare all European countries, the United States, and Canada across many different factors. Number 5. Cyprus. If the Irish crisis was the story of private debt turned public, Cyprus was the terrifying final chapter of that same logic. It is a short, brutal, and incredibly important tale because it tells the story of the night when Europe decided to change the rules of the game forever, using a small Mediterranean island as a test subject. For years, Cyprus had built its fortune on a model that was as profitable as it was dangerous. Its secret was simple: extremely low taxes, few regulations, and strict banking secrecy. It became the little Switzerland of the Mediterranean, a massive offshore vault that attracted enormous foreign capital, especially from Russia. As a result, its banking sector became a disproportionate monster, nearly 8 times larger than the country's entire economy. It was a financial giant with feet of clay, but Cypriot bankers, greedy for even greater profits, made a fatal mistake. They placed a colossal bet, almost an all-in. They invested billions in Greek government bonds, which offered sky-high returns. They believed it was a safe deal, relying on a dogma that circulated across Europe. The Union will never let Greece fail. They were wrong. In 2012, when Greece was forced to restructure its debt, it was a bloodbath for private creditors. Greek bonds lost more than half their value. For Cypriot banks, stuffed with them, it was the kiss of death. A black hole opened in their balance sheets. They were bankrupt, and the small Cypriot state was far too small to rescue them. Cyprus also turned to Europe for a bailout. It expected the usual script: a loan in exchange for austerity. But by 2013, the world had changed. Public opinion in Northern Europe, especially in Germany, was furious. The idea of using German taxpayers' money to save the bank accounts, often undeclared, of Russian oligarchs in Cyprus was politically unacceptable. The Troika said no to a traditional bailout. It introduced a new and ruthless principle: those who had taken the risk would now have to pay. The proposal shocked the entire world: a bail-in, a rescue from within. After days of panic and closed banks, the final solution was brutal. Deposits under €100,000 were protected, but those above that threshold were frozen and used to fill the holes. The wealthiest depositors lost nearly half of their savings. Cyprus was forced to downsize its economic model forever. But the real lesson was not for Cyprus. It was a warning for all of Europe, because that night the rules of the game changed. Until then, the dogma had been that governments, and therefore European taxpayers, would save failing banks. With Cyprus, Europe tested a new and merciless principle. From now on, those who would pay first would not be the taxpayers, but those who had invested in the bank, including large depositors. It was the dawn of the bail-in era. From that night on, the message for every European saver and investor was clear: money deposited in a bank above the guarantee threshold was no longer untouchable. It could be seized to save the bank from collapse. After examining the economic crises of some European Union nations, you have surely noticed something very important. These 5 countries revealed a profound truth. Disaster never comes from a single cause, but from the explosive encounter between wrong domestic choices and the rigid rules of the common house. On one side, we saw states that, for different reasons, had lost control, some by falsifying accounts, others by inflating housing bubbles, others by allowing corruption to spread unchecked. On the other side, we saw a European architecture laid bare. The crisis revealed that the common house had been built incomplete. But why? Because it lacked the instruments of solidarity, such as a common budget, that exist in other monetary unions. And here lies the heart of the problem, and of Europe's division. For citizens of the northern nations, such as Germany, the idea of paying for someone else's debts was unacceptable. They argued, "We have made our sacrifices. We cannot pay for the irresponsibility of others. If we did, no one would have any incentive to behave responsibly." For citizens of the south, the answer to the northern nations was just as strong. They claimed, "The euro has benefited your exporting economies above all. Our deficits are the other side of your surpluses. A union cannot exist without solidarity." These are 2 positions, each with its own reasons, which at times are not reasons that can be reconciled with one another. In this clash of visions, without an agreement on true risk sharing, the only path left was austerity and conditional loans. And so, the final lesson may be the most complex one. The fire was extinguished, but the common house remains fragile. It forced every country to confront its own internal demons, but it also left an open and unresolved question. Is it possible to share a currency without one day being willing to share a common destiny as well? The answer is incredibly complex, and we'll be honest, not even we at Amazing Europe have it. We recognise that finding a one-size-fits-all solution for every country is truly difficult. That is why we would truly love to hear your opinion. Here, you can also watch the first part of this video, where we revealed some of the economic background that led to the war between Ukraine and Russia. We would really like to know what you think. That's all for this video. See you next time.